Let the word go forth.
Fool me once.
Are you fired up?
I'm not a crook.
Are you ready to go?
Shame on you.
It's Abe Lincoln's Top Hat, hosted by Ben Kissel.
Fool me, can't get fooled again.
Hey, what's up, everyone? How are you? Ben Kissel here. Marcus Parks is busy working for you, so he is not here today. But I am honored to have with me. I'm gonna say friend. I'm gonna say he's my friend. He is a former CIA covert operations officer. He is currently the president of Diligence LLC, a global intelligence and security firm. Mike Baker is with me. Thank you so much for being on the show, man.
No, thank you, Ben. Appreciate it. It's been a while.
I know it's been far too long. I know you're calling in all the way from Boise, Idaho, which is really exciting. So thank you for
giving
taking
that shout out to Boise. The Chamber of Commerce thanks you.
Boise doesn't get enough love. It's a beautiful place.
That's a beautiful place, and may I remind you that Boise State University is now in the top 20.
All right, very good.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know, it's also Wall Street Journal had an article about 6 or 8 weeks ago. They called Boise the fastest growing city in America.
Wow, there you go. We're all getting very old. When you start picking up small town facts like that, you can just picture yourself on the front porch swinging. You know, the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago said we were the fastest growing city in America, just so you know.
That's exactly right. And I am actually sitting on the porch. I'm whittling. I was whittling when you called. So I'm actually whittling a walking stick. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
So we got a bunch of stuff to get to. I want to talk more about the global things that are happening globally. Obviously, as we talked about before we started recording, they're not getting a lot of attention because all of the attention seems to be going directly towards the White House and all the White House drama. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Iran and other places around the world. But let's start with the place we have to start with, which is the White House. And of course, we have this now infamous New York Times op-ed. It's anonymous, and no one knows who wrote it. What are your thoughts? Omarosa believes that the person who wrote it was probably in the vice president's office. I've also heard some speculation that it's someone from the national security wing of the White House. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wouldn't make bank on anything that Omarosa says, frankly. I think one of the interesting things with this anonymous op-ed is how both parties, right, the folks from both sides have kind of been kicking it in the ass because they're saying, look, you have to identify yourself. This is complete weakness here for you to come out and say, look at me, I'm fighting for the betterment of the world, and I'm doing what I can internally. And I'm thinking, piss off. I have no time for that sort of behavior. Either you can man up or woman up and declare yourself, I could care less whether they lose their job or not. But if they feel this strongly about it, then they should identify themselves. You know?
Well, now, what would happen if they did identify themselves? Some people think it might be like Dan Coates or someone like that. Do you think that anyone with the experience of someone like Dan Coates would actually risk their entire career just to get a 1,000-word op-ed in the New York Times? Or do you think this must be someone who is like, connected, maybe in the vice president's office or something, but perhaps not that high up?
Yeah, here's what I think. And anybody who imagines it to be Mattis or Coates or anyone, I think hasn't spent very much time in Washington. And look, I will make a book on the fact that whoever wrote this will turn out to be some mid-level career government staffer who is probably got a track record of voting Democratic and is at best, like I said, mid-level. And that's, what do I know? But that's based on 30 years of working in the intelligence and information industry. It's just a gut feeling, and I could be completely wrong, but it reads like, and it has the feeling of somebody who's a career person, probably doesn't even work legitimately in the White House, is in the administration, but there are a ton of career staffers. People shouldn't forget that. People imagine when they hear, it's someone in the administration, that it's, somebody, who is senior and who walks in and out of the White House. There are countless government staffers who stay in their positions from one administration to the next, Sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're not because they don't perceive themselves getting enough hugs. But I think that's kind of that's probably what we're dealing with here.
Well, and of course they've been labeled the deep state by a lot of people who like to have fun terminology to make life seem more interesting. But they say it's one of like 29 people or something like that. But what do you think about, what does this mean just in general when we have someone within the White House? And you know me, I do not like Donald Trump. I think perhaps he doesn't need to see all the documents when it comes to certain countries and things like that that might be doing nefarious things. He might take the country that's doing nefarious things side and start trying to bring those things back home to roost. But what do you think it means for the White House in general to have somebody in there who is messing with the president's agenda from the inside? It's kind of scary, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is, and it's people should set aside their partisan beliefs, and then everybody's at this point nobody lives in the center, so you're either right or left, it seems like, and you're throwing hand grenades at the other side. But they should step back and think, okay, well, if this was the Obama administration and someone came out and said this in an anonymous way, that I'm working to thwart activities from within the Obama administration, imagine how many heads would be exploding as they hunted this person down. And so, that same irritation, that same frustration, that same disbelief and anger at this person should be the same that you feel now. If you've got somebody who's sitting inside a White House, no matter what the administration, and they say that they're working to thwart their policies and their efforts, that's a banana republic thing, right? I spent most of my the childhood and adult life overseas in some very strange places. That's bordering on fourth world behavior, and that's why I'm my feeling is it won't be difficult to figure out who this person is, and I'm sure it will. They will be outed at some point, and they should be, because it's wrong. And whether it's wrong now, whether it would be wrong in the Obama administration, Clinton administration, any other, it's the same concept. It shouldn't be done. If you don't like it, get out and work. If you don't like it, get out and work from the outside. Change things the way this country was meant to change. Politics. That's how it's done. Vote. Influence public policy. Do those things. Yeah.
Well, absolutely, and we'll see what happens in November. Who knows? I'm not making any predictions because my past predictions have all been wrong. So I stand on the sidelines when it comes to the prediction game. But as I sort of jokingly talked about how Trump goes overseas and he takes a lot of the leaders' worst ideas. For example, he wants to have a military parade, with all of our military goods, which of course would be hugely, first of all, national security, showing every single person all of our military equipment. Probably not a great idea, far too expensive, and it does seem like something that happens in more in authoritarian regimes, such as we have in North Korea. What do you think about North Korea? They had their little military parade. They didn't represent the nukes. The nukes were nowhere to be found. Previously, those were the belle of the ball. Everyone talked about the nukes in North Korea, but they did not appear in their last military parade. Do you think this is a positive sign towards denuclearization, or do you think this is simply a shallow gesture to perhaps throw Donald Trump a little bit of love?
Well, hey, it was a gesture. Like the first brief job I had before going overseas with the agency was on the North Korea desk, right? And what I would say is what we've been doing for the past generations, several decades, stretching back to Kim Jong-un's granddad, it hasn't worked, hasn't produced results, hasn't done anything that is in our best interests. So, you know what? I'm of the camp that, look, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I thought we had the two worst candidates you could ever imagine. I thought, how did that happen in the country of over 300 million people? But my point being is, I want the administration to work because it's good for national security and it's good for us. So whether it's the economy or whether it's a foreign policy issue, so I'm willing to give it a ride. I think we have to be pragmatic and realize that denuclearization can take a very long time and a long series of meetings and very heavy lifts. But, yeah, it was a gesture to not throw the nukes out on the parade.
You've been to these places. You know how horrible the regimes can be around the world, and we'll talk about Iran here in a minute. But when it comes to North Korea, Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump is on Twitter talking about how they're great friends. This is still a man who has millions of people in gulags, torturing folks. Their entire family lineage is being tortured. They're born into slavery, and he calls him a good friend. Why isn't there more of a backlash when it comes to that?
Well, because again, I think in part, I think people do realize that nothing else has worked, right? I mean, we could continue the same policy, but doing the same thing over and over again isn't going to have any result that we would like. If what we want to do is try to change that the behavior of that regime, then I would argue, you know what? Let's give it a run. Look, this guy Trump is not in any mold, right? He's disruptive. There's constant self-inflicted wounds. But I'm not the sort of person that looks at it and goes, everything that happens out of this administration is the death of the republic, because it's not. I mean, I would like to see, something different. I would like to see a more eloquent, sophisticated, messaging and all the rest of it, of course, like everyone.
Right.
But I'm not that person that's going to stand and scream at the sky, if I think that there are certain aspects of this that works. It's the same with the previous administration. You can't, that's not how you should conduct yourself. You should be willing to look at each issue and, set aside I don't know. I've never seen anything quite like this. Right? I mean,
it is interesting.
Yeah.
It does seem anything that Donald Trump does, obviously it's going to be scrutinized by over half of the country and despised by over half of the country, even if he's attempting, in fairness, Jared Kushner does seem to be working across the aisle when it comes to prison reform. We'll see if anything actually happens with that.
Right. That's a good point to mention. Yeah, I think so.
Yes, so that is a good thing, and it's difficult, but that is good. And so I've said this since the beginning. I'm trying, and I have very little power, virtually none. But when Donald Trump does do things that I agree with, I'm trying to say, hey, good job. Continue down that path. But then, of course, he starts talking about his immigration policies and how he is liberating these communities from illegal aliens and things like that, which I always sort of lose interest in because I think it's quite vile, the language that he uses.
But I agree. I mean, call out where there's problems, but where there's movement, where things appear to be working, whether it's the economy or particular issues. I don't have any problems with saying, okay, let's see if that works. I hope it does work, because theoretically that should be good for all of us. But certain things, you got to question and say that's wrong. It's the wrong approach. It shouldn't be done. It needs to change. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that you got to go on Sherman's march and just declare everything needs to be burned down.
Right. Well, when it comes to the intelligence perspective of this administration, what are your personal thoughts as far as how he's doing? What is the United States foreign policy right now at this point? We can talk about Iran here. We can talk about Syria. Obviously, we have the sanctions against Russia, which are pretty significant. But what is everyone, the Bush doctrine? Obama had his foreign policy, pretty well solidified. We knew what it was. The drone war, slowly, getting troops out of the Middle East, for better or for worse. Better if you're ISIS, that's for certain. But what is, in your mind, the policy coming from this administration when it comes to foreign affairs?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very good question, right? I mean, you'd like to think that every administration, traditionally anyway, because it's, I think in part the media likes to do it, in part, it makes it easy to kind of put everything into one sentence. So what's the doctrine? What's the foreign policy doctrine? I don't know that I'm smart enough to encapsulate it, but I suppose on the top line, it would be what they've talked about, which is America first, right? And I think that is, it sounds trite because that's what the administration throws out there constantly, but in foreign policy terms, it actually means something to people overseas. It means something to, foreign leaders, because that helps them understand, where we're coming from, and helps them understand that there is a sea change here. Look, President Obama, part of his doctrine was sort of a defensive crouch, right? To go, and he was looking to step back from, the years of the Bush administration, where we were interjecting ourselves, putting ourselves out there in a very heavy way.
Right.
And so he was looking to withdraw to some degree. Now, you could argue, hey, I mean, if that allows us to focus internally on our problems and our infrastructure and other issues, that's not a bad thing. It does have a negative impact, and you could see that overseas in certain arenas, right? I mean, particularly problems with Syria, problems with the development of ISIS. So there are some issues there, but I would say that the Trump doctrine does seem to be kind of what they declared it would be, which is America first. So, you could look at whether it's the Chinese negotiations over the tariffs, whether it's the way that we've been dealing with NATO and the EU. There's a feeling that, we may assert ourselves when we believe it's in our national interest, but if we believe it's not in our best national interest, we're not going to do it. Now, that's, maybe I'm making it sound too pragmatic. I don't know, and I don't want to. Right. I don't want to make it sound as if I'm saying it's a very sophisticated policy and it's well spelled out. But I think that's where it's headed.
Well, judging by Donald Trump's Twitter, nothing is well spelled out. That is for sure. That is an absolute fact. And that's interesting you bring up the tariffs. I was just on Cavuto yesterday talking about those. And, of course, Donald Trump talking about how he has a feud going with Apple, telling Apple they should come and build all of their products over here. Of course, the irony is the OLED screens, the camera sensors, all of those are products created in China. Those are Chinese products. So no matter what, I mean, there's no way that Apple will be building their, it just doesn't make any sense. Samsung will still be over in China. Apple will end up losing, a significant amount of money. In China, of course, they pay their workers around $100 a week compared to what you have to pay them here. So anyway, it's not going to happen, despite what Donald Trump.
I do think there's a tendency. It's still, even at this point, even this far into the first term of this administration, for folks to try to take things that the president says too literally. And
but Mike, he's the president, though. That's the problem.
I wouldn't take anything that he tweets or says literally. I wouldn't say, okay, this is what he means, because it's not. I mean, right? I mean, being in New York, anybody who's spent a few years or longer in New York over the past 20 years watching this guy as running a small family property development business in a very hard-nosed environment, you're throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks sometimes.
Right. I know. It's just difficult when we have to live under a president where we can't take him seriously, because if we do, it's horrifying. But it's kind of sad that we can't take a president literally. Of course, on the heels of Obama, who was someone that, the policies aside, there were some mistakes made. And I don't think he followed through with enough of his rhetoric. But when it comes to his speeches, he certainly was to be taken literally, and they were quite impactful. And, of course, now he's back out there campaigning for the Democrats. We can get to that in a second, though. So when it comes to...
I guess I would push back a little bit and say, look, and again, I think there were some really good qualities of the previous president, President Obama. But I would also say that, I don't know that... you could say that, you could take all his speeches literally. Yeah, he gave great speeches. I mean, that helped march him into office. I mean, that guy, there's no doubt about it, right? And that's part of the problem is the shock between the eloquence of the previous president and what we've got now.
Yes.
But there were plenty of times when Obama would get out there and say things that sounded wonderful, but there was no follow through. There was no substance behind it.
Right.
So great. We all feel good about ourselves, and we feel pretty darn self-righteous and intellectual. But I don't know. I'm not trying. What I'm trying to say is I'm a policy person. If things work, if from an operational perspective, great. Sometimes the messaging, can be completely screwed up.
Yes.
But we tend to look at in my whole job, what's the end result of the operation? Right? It may get messy getting there,
right.
But if the operation at the end of the day accomplishes an objective that's in our best interests, then that's a good thing.
Well, let's talk about some policy then. So obviously, going back to Obama, we have the Iran deal. The Iran deal has been tore up under Donald Trump. What's the policy with Iran right now? We've talked about this on the show before. Obviously, the previous uprising was more of an urban uprising, people who were educated in the cities. The economy collapsed in Iran. Now you have a rural uprising, people who tended to support the regime a little bit more. So the regime is is really getting it from both the educated and the uneducated working class. What's the U.S. policy in Iran, and what the heck is happening over there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's you're right to steer towards Iran, because it's really not getting any attention at this point, and the level of dissatisfaction and the sort of the way the economy there is going sideways is really remarkable, given I mean, when you look at the past 20 years,
right,
and what's happened over there. So this is the potential for a sea change is there.
So what's the U.S. doing as far as, I mean, I'm sure that we have.
Well, I mean, I think what they're doing essentially is saying, look, this is, let's get our foot back on the gas as far as the sanctions go, which was part of this. Look, the Iranian deal, the nuke deal from the previous administration. The problem I've got with it was there were a couple aspects to it. One was everybody wanted to talk about how they were complying. Oh my God, why would we get rid of this? They were complying, and that's good. Well, you know what? I've said this in various ways. I've always tried to find a good way to explain this, but the Iranians agreed to a deal at the point where they got everything they wanted in it. And what they wanted was a deal that allowed for no inspection, nobody to step foot anywhere near a military site, a military facility in Iran. And so were they complying with the facilities that they allowed to be put into that deal? Yes. But guess how many times we visited or inspected a military site in Iran? 0 times. No times whatsoever. So that's a problem, because when people talk about how they were complying, or when John Kerry said the important thing with these deals is verification, yes, then you shouldn't do the deal because you don't have verification of the key, most important sites in Iran. So that's a significant issue.
Well, now wasn't like the IAEA, something like this, the International Energy Agency? Now, weren't they supposed to be the ones inspecting Iran and their nuclear facilities?
And they were, and they themselves also said there's a problem here because we don't have any insight, we have no transparency, nothing in terms of the military facilities, because that's the only reason that the Iranians agreed to do the deal. Part of the deal also, and the reason why the Europeans continue to moan about the fact that the deal has been torn up by the U.S. administration, is because, look, one of the major attraction for them, and I don't want to sound like a complete cynical ass here, but was the business side of things, the commercial aspects of this. The French, the Germans, the Italians, they couldn't wait to be allowed to rush into there, and they did. I mean, they were on top of it, the next day. And so they're moaning about this and complaining about it is because the last thing they wanted to do was unwind all the commercial deals that they had enacted, and they were sizable. So, but I guess from the administration point of view, what I'm saying is whether it would be the Trump administration or any other administration, I would have been a big fan of setting the deal aside, laying back on sanctions, and if those sanctions help to damage the current regime, because the economy is heading south, and that's the biggest issue they've got right now, then I don't think that's a bad thing. That's in our best interest. People would argue, oh, my God, but if the economy goes south, it's hurting the people. I feel bad about that, but not that bad, because
stone
we
cold,
should be acting in our own best interest.
You are stone cold. Isn't that unbelievable? So when it comes, but that is the question, though, because I am conflicted on that. Do we need, what's wrong with Iran, who really, quite frankly, has taken up the fight when it comes to ISIS in Syria, across that area?
Well, that's an interesting way to look at it, but
they've been killing ISIS. Iran is no fan.
Yeah, they're killing ISIS for one reason and one reason only, because they want to ensure their leverage in the region. They want to keep Assad in power, and they've got an arrangement with the Russians. So, but yeah, I mean, hey, have they been tagging, ISIS members? Sure. Is that a good thing? I'm not losing sleep over it, but is that in our best interest, I guess is what I'm saying, for Iran to have increasing amounts of influence and leverage in the Middle East? You probably not.
I mean, do you think we're ever going to go, because regime change, as we saw in Libya, as we saw in Iraq, it doesn't work. because that's just not the way that human beings are. No one's like, the U.S. just can't tell populations, this is your new leader, and they're like, oh, wonderful, thank you. Do you think that we'll see regime change in Iran within this administration's time span? Perhaps he gets reelected, who the heck knows? Or do you think it's more of just a long starvation process?
Well, I don't know about long starvation, but I think that, from the difference with Iran compared to Libya or Iraq is Iran had a long, stable history, right? I mean, there were established institutions. There was federal, if you want to call it federal control. It's not the tribal nature of what we've got in Libya in particular, in Iraq, or even Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. So they've got a track record, you could argue, right? Again, you know what? Hey, who knows? Could it happen? Well, yes, it could happen. We've seen stranger things over our years, I suppose. But is it likely to happen? I'm not making any book on it right now because we've been looking for that same those same indicators that maybe the regime or the population will at some point finally say enough's enough. Right. And who knows? I don't know, but I do know that the deal itself, the previous deal, was benefiting Iran and certainly from a commercial point of view, benefiting some European companies. Well, right. Much more than it was in our national security interests.
And of course, that would be why a lot of people think that Trump is turning his back on our allies and sort of befriending and natural enemies of the United States, such as Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. So when it comes to Syria, let's talk about that briefly. It hasn't been in the news at all. There's still a war going on there, folks, despite the fact that CNN or MSNBC or Fox, they don't cover it whatsoever. What's happening as far as Assad? Obviously, he's working closely with Russia and with Iran. He seems like he's going to be able to weather this storm and stay in power. It looks like they have a little bit more control over the country at this point. Assad and his
I think you're right. Assad's not going anywhere. The Russians were never going to allow for that to happen without knowing that whatever came in after Assad was also going to be on their side and allow them access to their only port in the Black Sea for their fleet, the Mediterranean fleet. So that was just not going to happen. And nor did the Iranians view it in the Iranians' national interests. Look, every country out there, I know I keep sounding like a complete douche, but every country out there acts in its own best interests. Right, of course. The only one that tends to apologize for it or has a significant population that apologizes when the U.S. acts in its own best interests is the U.S. And again, this comes from somebody I have spent a vast majority of my life overseas. Right. And so I feel like I've got some experience with how other nations operate and how they view us and how we view ourselves on the world stage.
Wasn't that sort of one of the points of pride for America? Was that we act in the world's best interest. People, you're a globalist. That term gets thrown around, all this kind of stuff. But wasn't that what America was all about? Was, I forget what Ronald Reagan, what did he say? A shining light on a hill, something like that. Wasn't that what America was supposed to be when it came to being concerned about what's happening overseas?
Right. I think that's right. And we should. And we're very proud of our democratic principles. And, we should, there's no doubt about that. And Woodrow Wilson, look at him. I mean, he established the United Nations after World War I. And, that was part of it. Oh, we're going to have this community of nations. But you know what? The world doesn't work that way, as Woodrow Wilson, after he died, found out with the onset of World War II. Look, as much as we'd like to think it's never going to be a case where we all hold hands and think about what's better for the other person rather than what's better for myself, whether we're talking about individually or as a nation or as a global community, if you can use the word community. So, it makes me sound like a complete, I don't even know what I can say on this show, but
well, you can say whatever you want.
I'm hampered by my lack of language.
Well, it probably makes you a very good covert operator. When you don't, keeps you quiet when you have to be.
But anyway, so I think that I think that from our perspective, yes, we should always, and we do. I mean, my experience, and again, we can only speak from our own individual experience, and mine has been
Right.
over the years, 30 plus years in this business, is we do try, and I know I always get this sort of the eye roll from some folks when I say this, but as a nation, we do try to do the right thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we make a wrong turn, but I've also seen over a long period of time that we try to self-correct. We try to do the right thing at some point. We try to correct our mistakes. And it is good that we assert ourselves on the global stage, because I tell you, if we're not there, if we're not in a leadership position, what comes in behind us is nowhere near as magnanimous as we are. And that's just my belief. Other people can snort and laugh at that.
It's interesting. I mean, and obviously I don't believe in regime change, but I do think the U.S. can do good things globally. And obviously, when you create a power vacuum, other entities will fill it. We're seeing that with China right now, obviously with Russia, what's going on in the Middle East. But let's talk about Russia right now a little bit. We got to talk about meddling. We have to talk about, I want to hear your thoughts as a CIA, an ex-CIA operative, this cyber war. It's interesting because I watched the John McAfee documentary yesterday, and this man is a total freaking lunatic. He is he's a killer. He's about everything bad under the sun. But he did talk about in 2016, when he had a sort of a presidential run with the Libertarian Party, about how cyber warfare, and he was talking about this previously, cyber warfare is going to be future war. What are your thoughts on that, and how is the U.S. doing to combat what seems to be an onslaught from the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Russians? I mean, globally, it's a cyber warfare situation happening. How's the USA, how are we doing when it comes to combating that?
Yeah, no, it's a whole series of really good questions that we could spend days on, but I don't think your listeners want. They're going like, oh my God, no. No.
Hey guys, today's podcast is sponsored by NordVPN. If there's one thing the past couple of years in politics has taught us, it's that not enough people are taking steps to make sure their information and identity are safe and secure when they go on the internet. If you care about your privacy and security online, and you should, I recommend going to nordvpn.com/tophat for 66% off a 2-year plan. NordVPN is a virtual private network that uses thousands of servers in more than 61 countries with military-grade encryption and absolutely no data logging to keep your data safe. When you connect to a website, your connection can be very vulnerable to all sorts of prying eyes. Think of visiting a website as a two-way street. You're getting information from the website, but you're also sending out all sorts of personal information while you do it. The two-way street can be very easy for all sorts of nefarious spying, hacking, and stealing of information. NordVPN creates an encrypted connection routing through many international servers, making it impossible for hackers or just about anyone to get at your data. Ease your mind while you're online and never have a hacking scare again. Also, as a listener of this show, I'm sure you care about net neutrality. With the constant changing legal landscape regarding net neutrality, it's more important than ever to take your online security seriously. Their Chrome browser is lightweight and user-friendly and secures your browsing in seconds. As you know, I'm not the most tech-literate guy, and even I found it a breeze to use. They're compatible with most operating systems and works even in China, Saudi Arabia, and other countries that limit internet access with firewalls. NordVPN also has great user-friendly Android and iPhone apps to secure your information wherever you go. And the best part is that NordVPN is risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Get smart and start protecting yourself today. NordVPN is offering you 66% off a 2-year plan. That's about $3.99 per month. Just go to nordvpn.com/tophat or click the link in the description to sign up and start protecting yourself. That's nordvpn.com/tophat, TOPHAT. Use code TOPHAT and get started today.
But I would say that, look, I mean, yes, I think McAfee's right in the sense that the next major, if you want to call it global conflict, whatever, will in large part be played out in cyberspace.
Right.
But we shouldn't imagine somehow that the days of traditional warfare are gone. Look, Nobel thought when he created dynamite that it would ultimately end to the end of war. As was known, right? But obviously that didn't work out well. And so we're still going to be, there's still going to be room for guns and bombs. That's never going to change. But the cyber aspects of it and the ability to inflict physical damage,
right,
massive physical damage through cyberspace is the most worrisome thing within the U.S. intel and military community.
I was watching some documentary, and I forget, they all kind of blur together, but they went to the power grids all across America. I mean, these things, many of them are in shambles, like truly in shambles. How difficult would it be to just knock one of those out?
Right. Well, it's not. And the amazing thing, and it's a very good question, is look, we've got 3 grids. There's only 3 grids in the United States. There's the East grid, the West grid, and the Texas grid. That's it. So there's 3 grids, and they are. People should think of them. They should imagine the power grids around the country put together like a patchwork quilt, because that's kind of how they developed over decades and decades and decades and decades of these things being put together. And they were never built. They were never, sewn together with the intention of withstanding either physical attack or certainly a cyber attack. And so the protections were never built in there from the beginning. And so everything gets retrofit. Well, it's an enormously costly experience or effort. And so, what we're doing is spending a lot of money to put lipstick on a pig, right, and try to make it as robust as possible in the face of potential attacks. But how easy would it be? Well, it's not for an individual or a hacktivist or whatever you want to call it. If they're motivated and they're willing to, spend all their time and really focus, and they're able to, avoid law enforcement and intel and all that, then, they could cause some damage. From a state-sponsored perspective, a state entity out there that decides to go through that, they've already done the mapping.
Right.
So our infrastructure has been prodded and probed and mapped out for years now. And the reason is for future contingencies, right? So, and one of the reasons why China is so intent on winning the 5G race in telecoms is because that will be critically important in terms of controlling internet and controlling, if you want to think about it, sort of the roadmap of future conflict, basically. So it's a enormously difficult issue. Washington, Capitol Hill has been very slow to the game over the years in terms of understanding the problem.
Well, that's what it seems like. I mean, even when we're having these conversations about Russian hacking, people are still focusing on the $25,000 they spent on Facebook memes and, the real tangible stuff, which I don't think it swayed anyone's vote, quite frankly. It's solidified their opinion, and perhaps they got a chuckle with their other, dumb uncles or whatever. But the inner workings of these attacks, that seems to be something that Washington has zero clue on how to combat. Do you think that Mattis is an old school guy, John Kelly's an old school guy? Do you feel like they are equipped to handle this? And I mean, they must understand the threats. Well,
they I don't know that they actually fully understand from a technical standpoint. They understand that there is a threat and that they need to be dealing with it. There has been legislation that's been pushed around over the past 10 years in particular. But you're talking about, when you think about Washington, D.C., you're talking about a regulatory process, a legislative process that is in no way equipped to keep up with the pace of technological advance, right? And so they're always behind the curve. And, part of it is also understanding what it means, right? So the Pentagon is still trying to write out their plans for what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace, and then what's an appropriate response. All that has to still be fleshed out, even though they're talking about, people are aware of it. They've got Cyber Command put up, and And so it's not as if they're not devoting time and effort to it. But I still say the same thing, which is that we have been slow to the game in understanding the seriousness of it.
Right. It seems like, we're a Titanic, and there's a lot of other nations that are more like speedboats because maybe they're not as solidified as a country and perhaps not as large. Of course, we are quite big
and they've also
as a
got
nation.
state control, right? If you're China and your state enterprises are beholden to the regime, right? You can move things faster. You can do things quicker than you can in a democracy. So they've got an advantage in that point. I wouldn't want that advantage, frankly, but, that's what they've got.
Yes, and of course, when it comes to the trade war that Donald Trump wants with the Chinese, Xi Jinping's going to be there for life, so I think he can just wait it out, and I don't think he's that concerned if his people suffer a little bit. When it comes to the cyber war, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. We know that Russia has all these farms. There's other nations that have their cyber warfare farms where they pay all these employees and they go in there and they muck up the works. Do you think it could ever lead to tangible?
You sound like somebody's grandpa.
I am, honestly. My friends are all
wreck it. They completely wreck it.
They muck it all up, and I know it's pathetic. I've become very old over the past 8 months, and I don't know what's happening to me. I'm like, I forget what insurance company has the commercial be like, don't become your parents, and it's like it's happening.
It's happening.
When it comes to cyber war, is it possible that it could lead to tangible war with the bombs, with the military equipment? Is it possible that we end up going over there and doing selective strikes on these facilities that are contributing to the cyber crimes from other nations?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you war game this thing out and you imagine, okay, what are we going to do first? Well, we'll cripple their power grid, or, and what does that do? Well, imagine, people should think about it, because I think sometimes they think, it's a power outage. Yeah, what's a big, well, if you imagine the entire East grid goes down, and maybe there's a cascading effect, and all of a sudden you lose the West or you lose Texas. And think about what that means in terms of now you don't have any power. So very soon you don't have the ability to move goods. You can't move fuel. You can't move food. You can't move water systems, healthcare systems going down. You can't go to the ATM and take out cash. You don't have any compensation there. Things break down. We all like to think, we've got better instincts and we'll all be a community. But again, I go back to that other point, which is that's not how the real world works. Right. So this is, and so you do that. You take out part of the system. Then you got to backfill, right? And how do you backfill? Well, you backfill in the old traditional way of going in with airstrikes. And, then, depending on where this conflict is taking place, maybe you've got troop movements. So, sure, when you war game this thing out, it doesn't end with a cyber strike just to demonstrate that you can do it, right? Once that happens, there is going to be retaliation. And the confusion is it's extensive, right? How do you find attribution? How do you determine for sure that you fully attributed who caused the attack? In which case, then what's an appropriate response? And then how do you prevent escalation? And I mean, this is what keeps people up at night in the military and intel community.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe Boise might last a little bit longer. You got a little bit more space out there. I know living in Brooklyn, if the power goes out, I mean, I'm giving it 25 minutes to 30 minutes before the entire society breaks down. And I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe start and put some nails into a baseball bat or something. I don't know.
Well, look, I saw a fight break out. I saw a fight break out in one of those big box stores over the last generator that they had in stock during a power outage on the East Coast where I was living. And the power had only been out for a couple of days. It was wintertime, and I think that, the concern was it was going to go on for a while. Right. But you watch that and you think, okay, look, I would like to think better, and maybe over a long period of time we all kind of pull our heads out and we realize, okay, this is going to go on for a while. Now we got to pull together. But typically the outset is chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll have a definite Lord of the Flies situation for at least a little while.
You don't want to be Piggy.
No, definitely not. No, and that was my nickname in high school, so I really don't want that to happen, but it's possible. When it comes to spies, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. We just saw there was that woman, that Russian gal. She was proved to be a Russian spy. She was working with a guns activist group, a pro-guns activist group, which also tied itself to the NRA. I know you are a member of the NRA. I think you do commercials for them. What are your thoughts on, first of all, how many of these Russian spies, or how many foreign spies do you think are actually in America, given your understanding?
There's 18,420.
Perfect.
But I probably shouldn't have let that number out. That's probably a sources and methods thing. I know I have no idea, but I will say it's more than you would imagine. Right? Look,
Okay.
If we just talk about Russia, Putin never thought that the Cold War ended. Right? Never assumed that the Cold War ended. Never assumed that there was going to be a peace dividend. After the wall fell, that was ridiculous. It was, and I know guys that came out of the GRU, the old military intelligence over there, and FSB. It wasn't as if they thought, okay, now it's peacetime. And that's what we thought here. We thought, oh, great, we're going to, again, because we're American and we think the better of things, and so we're proven wrong. And so we imagined we could get rid of the CIA. There was serious talk about that. And
Right.
Serious people. We could just shut the CIA down. Much like at the end of the war, 1945, after FDR had died, there's this fantastic letter. Harry Truman sent it to Bill Donovan, who had established and set up the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. And OSS had done an amazing job working behind the lines with the resistance in this incredible effort, right? So they've done all these wonderful things. A lot of OSS officers had died during the war. And in 1945, Truman sends him a letter, says, listen, I really want to thank you very much for everything you've done. It's been great. Don't let the door hit your butt on the way out. It was literally that. It was a 4-paragraph letter, and it was just, thanks, see you later. And the idea was, we don't need it anymore because now we're going to be better than that, and we're going to be a community. And the same thing after the wall fell. And so I guess my point being is Putin never imagined that ever.
Right.
And so it's not like they withdrew their spies or their sleeper cells or their assets from the U.S. And it's a real problem. China's the same way, and any other nation with the ability and the resources, same thing.
Well, now so when it comes to, Vladimir Putin is on top of the world right now. He got every single thing that he wanted. CNN just ran a series, Vladimir Putin, most powerful man in the world, which is, I think, very counterproductive and exactly, again, what he wants.
It's counterproductive, and it's also complete horse crap. It's not, and I think CNN knows it, but I think it's in their best interest to try to beef this guy up and build him up. But Putin runs a country that's got the GDP of a small European nation. Right. They live and die by the price of oil. And they've overspent and put money into the upgrade of their military in an effort to, bang the national drum, because that's what they typically always do when they're having problems. He finds a bogeyman. And so this idea that Putin is this massive strongman out there who is the most important person in the world is laughable to anybody that's been engaged in this sort of business for any period of time.
Well, I guess the reason that people allow that narrative to really sort of settle in is because of what's happening with, his interactions. Going back to the NRA, they were given a lot of money from the Russians, and then a lot of that money went to Republicans. So there were folks that speculated that perhaps the Russians, through this filter of the NRA, are kind of paying off Republicans. Do you give any credence to that? No, but then again, I don't. I'm looking around my office for my tinfoil hat, and I don't see it. I'll put it on, and maybe I will give it some credence at some point. Put the tinfoil hat on, Mike. I wouldn't trust the Russians as far as I could throw them out my 12th-story office window here, right? Ooh. But at the same time, you've got to be, pragmatic. And look, I worked the Russian target years and years and years ago, and they never changed. They're always influencing and attempting to meddle. They were doing it right after, go back to 1940. Right, we were. This country, the U.S., was internationalist, or anti-interventionist. Right, the last thing we wanted to do as a country was get back into another European war. Right, and there was this very strong movement to stay out of World War II. You had FDR and a handful of others who thought it was, actually very important. But they were pushing a big rock up a hill. So what did the Russians do? The Russians came over here, and when they were still allied with the Germans before Hitler had invaded Russia, thinking that was a clever idea, the Russians came over here and spent a great deal of time and effort
to try to convince us that, yes, we should stay out of the war, because they understood what it meant if we got in.
Well, that is an interesting point.
They paid off journalists. They paid off union leaders. They set up supposedly independent organizations. They do all the same things. It never changes.
Right.
And yet we wanted to act as if somehow this is, oh, my God, look what they're doing now. And they use technology, to their advantage in 2016. But the concepts and the objectives are all the same.
It is unbelievable when you hear those stories about them setting up pro-Trump and anti-Trump rallies, both set up by the Russians to occur at the same place. It's just brilliant on their part, and also really sad when you realize how easy it is to manipulate and deceive people. When it comes to Trump and Putin, we haven't talked in so long. So let's go. I mean, we have John Brennan, formerly of the CIA, of course, the head of the CIA, calling Donald Trump treasonous. He's kind of backwalked a little bit on that after he got a lot of blowback because treason is punishable by death and maybe not something you just want to throw out there. But the reason that he said that was because of the way that Trump acted in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin. What do you think was talked about for those couple of hours that they were alone? And do you think what were your thoughts watching Trump, in my layman's opinion, get played by Vladimir Putin? What were your thoughts with your CIA expertise?
Yeah, I think Trump imagined himself a little bit too clever in that scenario. I thought it was enormously disappointing. He had a terrific opportunity right there. Look, I mean, and this again, I don't put any stock in the whole collusion crap. I think the Russians are always at it. I think they're always trying to do crap. And I think Putin's a thug and an awful person. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm buying into this notion of collusion, because I'm not buying it. But at the same time,
he just doesn't do himself any favors, though, right?
He doesn't do himself any favors. He could have stood there. There was one question that was asked during that briefing, or during that conference, and it was, do you believe, in terms of the intel community, what they've said that they meddled? Do you believe the intel community? And all he had to do, think about this, all the president had to do was stand there. He's looming over Putin, who stands at about 4'8". He's looming over Putin. And all he had to do was say, we have complete trust and confidence in the U.S. intel community. We know that the Russians meddled, as they have been doing for generations. And he could have loomed and stared down at Putin. And he said, and we could have, and we will enact further sanctions if they continue to do this. And we will continue to enact sanctions in the seriousness that it deserves. And he could have left it at that. And that, what would that do? It was a political and an operational win. But he can't help himself. He's not. He's not. It's just the way he is.
Donald Trump strikes out playing softball every time. Charlottesville, another one. I mean, that's what Obama's out there campaigning now. He says, how difficult is it to denounce Nazis? And this is a really relevant point. How hard is it to stand up to Vladimir Putin and side with the U.S. intelligence agencies? I mean, it was ridiculous.
I know. But again, I would argue that, look, he could have shut up his critics right then and there. Right. So this is the thing with Trump. He never does anything that anybody expects. People have never seen anything like this in the White House. But people saw that and immediately said, well, that's proof of collusion. Well, no, it's not. It's proof of this flawed individual who walked into a meeting imagining himself smarter than Putin. And Putin, he's a smart cat. He's a survival guy. And so I just think, look, this guy completely misplayed this. It was hugely disappointing.
Yeah.
Did I think it was treasonous? No, I just think it was asinine and stupid and amateurish
and potentially dangerous, right?
And shouldn't have been done. And he had a brilliant opportunity right then and there to put a card down on the table, and he didn't do it.
Well, I thank you so much for taking the time. Final question to Mr. Mike Baker. First of all, it's two. Number one, really quick, yes or no, do you think Obama's going to help the Democrats in the November midterms when he campaigns for them, as he campaigns for them?
I don't think he's going to necessarily hurt them. I don't think they're going to get a big bump out of it. But, again, it's sort of that concept you mentioned earlier. People get convinced of their own beliefs. So, he'll impress the folks that are already going to vote the way they're going to vote. But I don't think it's going to damage, the Dems. I think I just don't think it'll be a big bump.
All right, and lastly, when it comes to Mueller, I know this is a big story, obviously, but people have heard about this ad nauseum. What do you think about the Mueller investigation? Do you think it wraps up relatively soon, within this next couple of months? Do you think Trump testifies? What are your, we have Manafort, we got Gates, we got Papadopoulos, we got all of these, we got Cohen, a lot of guilty pleas out there, and guilty verdicts. What are your thoughts, just briefly, on that?
Yeah, I think Mueller's a smart and a good person. I think the investigation suffers from what all special investigations suffer from in Washington, D.C. It's a place where the investigations go to die, right? But I think he's going to wrap it up relatively soon. Relatively soon is probably before the. I don't think it's going to be before the end of before the midterms, but I think before the end of the year. And nobody's going to be happy. I think the end result will be. It won't make the resistance or the Democrats happy, because there won't be sort of that smoking gun that they've been beating the drum for going on however many years, and it won't make the Republicans or the Trump supporters happy, because there won't be any sort of drawn a line under it, and there's absolutely nothing here. It's just going to be one of those mushy statements that you always get out of Washington from these things that, doesn't really satisfy either side. So I think it's going to be a wholly unsatisfying experience for everybody.
Great. Well, something to look forward to then. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you being here. Let's see. Do you want to plug anything? You got speaking engagements or your website, or tell the people how to find you.
There's always Diligence, for all your information and security needs. Then that's about it. I'm kind of on Twitter at MB Company Man, but I try to keep that sort of down the middle of the road. And
right.
I'm very much a centrist, and what I found out is that all that means is you piss off everybody.
Yep, that's why Twitter is basically useless. All right, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Have a great speech tonight.
Thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate it too. Take care.
All right, there it was, an interview with Mike Baker. Interesting guy. I always love talking to him. So I hope you liked the episode. And yeah, we disagree on some things and agree on other things, but I do think it's interesting to focus a little bit more on Iran. No one is talking about it. The war continues on in Syria. No one seems to discuss it in mainstream media. So it's nice to have a little conversation about what's going on overseas. If you get a chance, go to my website, benkissel.com, or my YouTube channel. It's just a Ben Kissel. And you can watch my most recent television hits. I did Fox and Friends first, and Cavuto. That was on Monday, and we talked a lot about Donald Trump, his war with Apple, and his tweet storms regarding the investigation, and a series of other things. He's been going a little Twitter crazy, which I know is a surprise to absolutely no one. And then on Fox and Friends First, we talked about Obama. Will he help or hurt the Dems? I believe that he will end up helping, specifically some Dems that are, like Casey out of Pennsylvania. He's definitely going to help. There are other Dems that are much more aligned with him politically, but then you have someone like John Tester out of Montana, or Heidi Heitkamp out of North Dakota. Places where Donald Trump did very well. Obama's probably not going to go out and campaign for them, and that's probably in their best interest. But then, of course, you look at Gillum in Florida going against DeSantis for governor, and I think that Obama will do great things for him in Florida, despite the fact that he was a little bit, it was controversial, his opening up the engagement with Cuba. Of course, a lot of the Cubans over there were not thrilled with his policy towards Cuba, but now in the wake of everything happening with Donald Trump and his immigration policies, I think the tide might be turning, and I'm sure that they will be more emotionally available for Barack Obama. So it's interesting to see him out now on the campaign trail. Haven't seen him for a very long time. A lot of people said too long, but I think it was good for him to take a little time off, quite frankly. You don't know what you got till it's gone, as they say. And at the very least, it's nice to hear somebody who speaks in a professional way and a compassionate way, and in a way that unites. Now, did he unite? Well, that's up for debate. His presidency it had a lot of flaws to it, and there was certainly a lot of turmoil. Look at Ferguson and a series of other riots that were happening all across the country when it came to protesting police brutality. there was a lot of turmoil under Obama as well. And did he handle those situations as well as he could have? These situations are very difficult to handle, and we can all be Monday morning quarterbacks on it. But I do believe, at the very least, he put thought into things. And I know there's a lot of folks out there who feel like a thoughtfulness is currently missing from the White House. So check out those clips on benkissel.com. You just go under television news and you can see all of my clips, or not all of them, but about 30 of them or 37 of them. Right there, or on YouTube. Put little comments. And on this Fox and Friends first one, it was funny because we were talking about Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was on Bill Maher's show, which I don't even know why I sit through these things, but I do it. And he was talking about, because he was on the show because he's got a new show on HBO coming out. He was trying to press, and Jim Carrey, of course, trying to be a populist man of the people on Bill Maher. You got to watch the interview if you haven't seen it. And then look at his Twitter. He's like, we have to unite Republicans and Democrats. And I'm like, look at your Twitter, dude. Your entire thing is against Republicans. So he's not trying to unite. And should he be or should he not be? Is that his job? No, it's not. He's a comedian. But I was mentioning, he mentioned how socialism, how the Democrats need to embrace the term socialism. So, of course, Fox News hears this and says, Democrats love socialism. And so I was explaining how Medicare is socialism, how the $12 billion bailout to the farmers, that's also socialism because of Trump's tariffs. And then I said, basically socialism is just giving people another piece of, and I didn't say pie, I said piece of pizza, which I thought was quite funny. My girlfriend and I had a good laugh. It's goofy, but it was a funny little moment. And so anyway, I think you'll laugh when you see that if you end up checking out those clips. There's a bunch of other news, of course, as well, but we shall get to that later. It never ends. It never ends. And when it comes to China, I do want to really stress this whole trade war, it is not going to work out. There are very few economists, very few people who understand this stuff much better than I do, who believe this is a good idea. Donald Trump feuding with Apple, talking about how they should build in the U.S. It's never going to happen because Apple, again, as I mentioned briefly in the interview with Mike Baker, OLED screens, camera sensors, the multiple components that go into an iPhone are products of China. So they would have to be traded here to the company here. And again, the company, Apple, the majority of the jobs would go to robots, a lot of automation there, and they would still end up losing a bunch of cash because you have to pay people a living wage, at least somewhat more reasonable here than in China. Again, the employees make about $100 a week. So this whole feud with Apple is totally crazy, and the tariffs, once again, they're just not going to work because Xi Jinping is there forever. And he can just wait Donald Trump out. So it is what it is. It's very bizarre that he wants to do this. But we are living in bizarre times, to say the least. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully by next week's episode, we'll know who the White House leaker was, who wrote the anonymous op-ed. Omarosa believes it's someone in the vice president's office. And who knows? It's never good when it comes to this White House. It is definitely in chaos. I talked about this on Cavuto. Donald Trump said his White House was a smooth running machine. And I made a funny little joke. I said, it's about as smooth running as the train from the movie Snowpiercer. I'm on fire. I'm here all week because it is obviously chaotic. Anytime your vice president vows to take a lie detector test to prove that he's not a leaker, it's not a good sign for an administration. So that's what's been going on this week, basically. But of course, we will keep you up to date, and we shall be with you next week as well. Hail yourselves, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.